Everybody wants to have abs until they find out what it takes to create abs. Everybody wants to be a real estate investor until they find out they have to talk to 1 million people, get, thrown through the wash and taken back out and just beat and slapped around, right? It's a matter of your ability to be, what's the word? Durable, your ability to keep showing up, your ability to not let these learning lessons be failures. They're not failures. They're only failures if you tell yourself that.
Welcome, everybody, to Real Estate Junkies, Coast to Coast. I'm your co-host, Rusty Ham on the West Coast. My other co-host, Steve on the East Coast. Say hey, Steve.
We keep coming back, don't we, Russell?
That's right. We're glutton for punishment.
Yeah,
it's good to see you, man. So today's episode, again, we talk about the 3 pillars of success, which is mindset, skill set, and systems. Today we're going to focus on the mindset aspect. And then we have so that's the warm up. Our game plan today is we're going to continue on sub 2s, which is these sub 2s. Again, there's 2 different types. There's one where we have a lot of equity and we create some sort of owner financing of the equity. Today's episode of sub 2 is if they don't have any equity or they're behind on payments. And then our cool down, I think, Steve, we're going to talk about one of your deals. So let's get into it with our warm up, which is the mindset, right? So Steve, I've been reading a book called The Gap and the Gain. Mm-hmm. And kind of the general overview of the gap and the gain is a lot of people focus on where the gap is. They focus on, let's say they have an idea or a goal in mind. And hypothetically in our community, it's called a take or a deal under contract. And they have 6 contracts they want to get done by the end of the year. And let's say they only have 1. And so what they're doing is they're looking at what they don't have, right? They don't have the 5 contracts and they're looking at that. That's a gap. They're looking at what they don't have instead of looking at what they've gained, which is when they first started in the community up until now. So touch on that because we both have gone through a lot of gains. We may not have accomplished some of the goals that we've had, but we definitely have gained a lot as far as our education in this business.
In the entrepreneurial world, I don't know if my gains had caught up. I feel like I kicked in the face, but it's all about patience. I think that it's really easy to create goals, right? Like just be like, give yourself something to sprint towards. And I think that the difficult piece, and that's why finding somebody to guide you through it, coming up with the action steps, we call them needle movers, right? So what are needle movers? Like you said, you have you today on the left side, you have where you want to be. And then you have this gigantic space in the middle where you got to figure out how to come up with a blueprint to create this thing over time. And that giant gap has a ton of time in between. And that time creates fear. It creates uncertainty. And I think that's where people struggle. Now, when you're setting goals for these things, I think one of the more challenging pieces is being able to create attainable goals because you expect so much from yourself. So what we like to do is break down, let's go this route, right? Russell, when we start the beginning of the year, or let's say even before, usually 3 months before the new year comes, we start looking at what are our goals for, let's say 2024. And you look at I always started off by jotting down these big things, right? The goals, the end goals, right? The highlight reel. Let's reverse engineer it after, right? Here's what I want to be. All right. Now, what are all these little action steps for me to achieve those things? And then if you don't get super detailed with it, that's where it becomes difficult. And what we do is we set these mini goals in the first quarter of the year, and we do them in like an order that makes sense and flows with what's actually possible for us to continue to get momentum and ride into the next thing, whether it's quarter 2, quarter 3, whatever it is. That's where it becomes that big mental jumble, right?
Yeah.
And especially when you start a business in the very beginning, you have these goals that are so lofty that you want them to happen so much faster than they actually happen. So depending on how it is that you have the right expectations for yourself affects directly how much you enjoy the process. And the people who are the best at things usually enjoy the process the most. So I don't know, you talk about it a little bit, Russell. That's the smart parts.
Yeah, in our community, we're always asking the students we do daily accountabilities. So they talk about they track their numbers, right? If you're not tracking, you're not winning. So we talk about how many dials did you make? How many people did you talk to? How many leads did you get? Blah, blah, blah. But at the very end, we ask for their wins. And the more wins you accumulate, obviously you're going to be more successful and you're going to gain that knowledge in the community. Obviously, when I first started, you're a woodworker. I was a PE teacher. And look at us now. We're freaking on a podcast talking about creative financing, and our knowledge since the first day has grown exponentially because we not only did we put time into it, right? But we took action, right? We took action and we had those little, like you said, those little pieces of action items we did every day. So we had these lofty goals, but we backtracked and we said, okay, what do we need to do to get there? And we took these little action items and it just increased over time. And we kept track of those wins. And look at us now. We're sitting here on a freaking podcast.
What's interesting though, Russell, is, and you've heard me say it before, but I really, truly believe this. Motivation isn't real. There's no such thing as motivation. I don't care what anyone says. You can say all you want. They wake up, I feel great. Motivation is the most inconsistent thing you can find. What's real is commitment and discipline. Those two things are the only thing that's going to push you through the days where you say, I don't feel like doing it. Everybody wants to have abs until they find out what it takes to create abs. Everybody wants to be a real estate investor until they find out they have to talk to a million people, get, thrown through the wash and taken back out and just beat and slapped around, right? It's a matter of your ability to be, what's the word? Durable, your ability to keep showing up, your ability to not let these learning lessons be failures. They're not failures. They're only failures if you tell yourself that. I have learned way more from the stuff that didn't go well than the stuff that did, right? So one of those things is if you can have a strong head on your shoulder or at least be surrounded with people to continue to give you triggers when you're down on yourself, like what do me and Russell? We know that we are the meanest people to ourselves. There is no one that can be meaner to you than yourself. My dad brain says I got to stop being fresh to myself. I'm being fresh all the time. But it's just, you have to be able to show up every day knowing that today may be tougher than the last one, but that's not going to stop me from doing these things that are getting me to this place that I don't know when I'm going to get there by, but I know if I keep showing up, I'll get there. So I think that's a big piece. And you said something super important. When me and you started, we knew nothing about real estate. It was terrifying. Being on the phone was terrifying. My chest felt like I was literally going to have a stroke or a heart attack for 6 months talking to people and never doing it before.
Right.
But look at this, 6 years later, we're talking about real estate as experts just because we didn't give up. How many times you get a million reasons why to give up, Russell, right?
Oh, 100%. Oh yeah. My first deal, I talk about all the time because I was a teacher. I was a full-time teacher and a high school basketball coach, right? And so I wasn't getting home. I was all day teaching and I was coming home after practice like sick, right? So when did I have time to make dials, right? So I would make dials during class. I'd send them on a mile run. Okay. And then I would do like free play soccer. And then I would make my dials, or like lunchtime, I had a dialer. So I would make a ton of dials during lunchtime. It took me a year to get my first deal. Who's going to wait around a year, right, to get their first deal? Not a lot of people, right? When I was a high school coach, I always said that it's your attitude and your effort, right? Those are the two things you can control, right? Your attitude and your effort, right? You can't control a referee calling a foul, right? You can't control you missing a screen, or you're setting a screen for your teammate and you miss it, right? You can control it, but sometimes it happens, but you can control your attitude and your effort. And I think that's what we did for the 5 years and the 6 years you've been doing it, is our attitude was always there. We never gave up in our effort, right? We were dialing every day. We were putting in the effort. And if you do that on a daily basis and you're consistent, like you said, and have that grit, it's going to happen, right? It's just naturally going to happen.
But then, anybody listening here who's not an entrepreneur but wants to know what the road is, I want you to picture yourself in Russell's handsome shoes and pretend you're Russell. And imagine you start this new career, this business you're trying to build, right? And you're not making any money. Pretend this is your career, right? You are Russell. You are, what is the proper way of saying phys ed teacher? Tell me again.
He's a physical education teacher.
No,
Yeah.
last time, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, my major was kinesiology, not I'm not a gym teacher.
So imagine you're a kinesiologist and you're Russell, right? And when he gets hired, they say, Russell, in about 12 months, when we feel you're ready, we're going to start paying you.
Right.
Or no, but this is like the mindset of being you're a real estate entrepreneur and you made no money. Actually, you had expenses for 12 months, right?
Correct.
You just keep getting kicked in the, you're getting better, but it's, I don't get it. I'm getting better. Why am I not having traction? Why am I not getting money? Why am I not? That's what we're told, like in our careers. What tells us that we did a good job that week? At 12 o'clock a.m. on Friday, money gets put in our account because we did what we should have done. You come and you do this other thing, you're building this business, and your money leaving your account for 12 months. So
Right.
a matter of, let's see how mentally tough you are. That's what's really important about also, how do we get from just starting to having a podcast, right? There was so much freaking growth in that timeline, right? Of uncertainty and fear and not understanding what's going on, and then getting traction and trusting it. And then once you start getting traction and now you figure out, I've done this once, how do I replicate? And you have a really good like formula now, start doing it more and more. Then you start finding your confidence and things change drastically. Not finding your confidence or how you speak to yourself holds you in the spot that you can't break free of. So once you find that confidence and then you start looking at all of these ways to self-develop and get better, everything changes over time. Like, you didn't know that you would be a coach in real estate. I didn't even know it was an opportunity. I didn't think that anybody would want to have me on their podcast and talk about real estate. Like, I didn't think that I would ever be capable of having the confidence to do so. And now we have a podcast where we're talking about this 6 years later, like nothing. But
Right.
that's 6 years of grinding and trusting and just having your back and showing up. And that's very difficult for most people.
Yeah. And we're going to get into the game plan in just a second, which is, we're going to pivot, but I'm a much different person, right? Since I started, right? I'm a better father now. I'm a better husband, just because, and it's not just real estate related, right? The community we were in, we were introduced to Dr. Amanda and Mark Willis and I'm Carol, all these people. And if you want to know more, we can talk about that later. But all these people have changed the way we think about certain things. And so I'm a better person now than I was 5 years ago because of what we were introduced to. So good stuff, Steve. I appreciate it. So yeah, let's transition into our game plan, Steve. Again, I talked about it at the beginning of the episode. There's a couple of different sub twos. Again, sub two is you're buying the home subject to the existing financing. And so the last time we talked about sub two, we talked about sub two with the owner financing component, which they had a ton of equity. And you just owner finance that equity at a later date, or you can make payments over time. Today, we're talking about a subject to the existing mortgage where they don't have any equity. If they were to sell it traditionally, they're going to break even, and or they're behind on payments, and we catch them up and we take over the house subject to the existing mortgage. Can you explain that a little bit?
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of people who aren't 100% aware of the kind of life stuff that happens to people who own houses that their backs are against the wall. And what we're going to talk about today is just that scenario. So there could be circumstances sometimes where people, they lose their jobs. Maybe their spouse passes away and they just can't afford the house anymore. And what happens to those people if they don't meet somebody that has a creative brain? What could happen is they could have their house foreclosed on, and because they weren't making payments. And if your house is foreclosed on and the bank takes your home, for the next 5 to 7 years, your credit is going to be trashed. Okay. It's completely trashed. And it sucks because, as everyone knows, when you have bad credit, everything's more expensive, right? Whether you're buying a car, whether you're buying a home, whether you're opening credit cards, everything's more expensive. So it really haunts you for a long time. So that's where sub two, buying homes subject to people's existing financing in those situations, it gives them a chance to not only get out of the situation before it becomes irreversible, but it also, from us catching them up and making payments, it instantly starts repairing their credit, every payment that we make. In the situation, let's say that I, seller, am no longer can afford my home. Let's say I lost my job and What ends up happening is month one, I can't make the payment. I can't make my payment anymore. And now we're 3 to 4 months in. I haven't paid a mortgage payment and I got the bank all over me. Just so happens Russell happens to call me to ask about buying my house. And I let him know the situation I'm in. Okay. And what Russell is able to do is explain the fact that here's what we can do. I can go ahead and I can buy your home. We would keep your actual mortgage in your name. I would then become the owner of the house. My LLC would buy your home. I'm going to catch up those 4 months, okay, that you're behind, and I'm going to start making your mortgage payment. I'm going to sell the home to somebody else, and somebody else is going to buy it over the next few years. This is going to allow you to be able to move forward, not have a foreclosure on your head, hanging over your head. Immediately going to start repairing that credit so that life is easier for you. If that's something that works for you, this will give you the ability to move on. So for example, I know Russell, you specifically had a situation just like this in one of your deals. Can you explain more of an in-depth version of a custom version of when this actually happens to people?
Yeah. And again, people out there are like, oh, you're taking advantage of these people. And why don't you just buy it traditionally? Why don't you just get a mortgage and just buy their house traditionally? The creative financing, we don't use banks, right? We don't use realtors. We don't use banks. And what we do, Steve, and we both have done this, we help sellers get through situations, like you said, whether it's a divorce, they lose their job, or in my case, they were a military family. They got shipped over to Hawaii. And I think because they knew they were being shipped and they were going to live on the bait, that they were just like, yeah, let's not make these payments. So they were 3 months behind. I caught them up. They had some equity. So we agreed on, an equity piece, and I was able to save their credit. Again, military families, thank you for their service. So I was helping a military family as well. They got shipped over to Hawaii. I maintained those payments and I saved their credit, and I was able to find a buyer to get into that home.
I love it. Yeah. It's funny too. I've been very fortunate for where I live. I was like 30 minutes from a military base in Connecticut. Groton is like a big military base and submarine company called Electric Boat that builds submarines for the military. So I had a handful of deals over there and all very similar situations. And this is the situation that was very similar to what you had mentioned. So we have family that a little bit different, but we had a family who got their papers to have to abruptly move to Texas. All right. So here's what they did. They hired a real estate agent and they had to move. So while the real estate agent had the home, they moved to Texas. And now they have a rental they're paying for in Texas. And they have this mortgage that there's only so much longer they're going to be able to pay both. And they're hoping this realtor can sell the home fast. This realtor on my deal went 12 months without selling it. So this guy was paying both a mortgage and a rental for that long until I happened to call him when he was about to not be able to do it anymore. This house didn't have any debt. I didn't have any arrears, but it was coming very soon. And what's funny is he had a realtor for 12 months. They couldn't sell it. And here's the reason why. This is an interesting situation. I know we're segueing the cool down, but this is interesting. So this gentleman, he ended up buying a house an hour away down the road. So he had to come back like every week and a half and mow the lawn and just have to take care of this home. It was a huge burden on him. The reason why this house didn't sell was because when he had the home 12 months prior, he was going through a divorce. And before they got divorced, as they were on that line of getting divorced, they decided that they were going to rip the house apart and flip it. They ripped the house apart and then decided to move from each other completely and be done. And then because it was so much work and so much was going on in their life, they tried to sell it ripped apart. So this realtor was trying to sell it for retail value after what it would have been worth if they finished it. I don't know why this realtor did that, or maybe just the owner of the property was just like, I need this for the house and I don't care. We got to keep it there. I don't know. So when I came along and I talked to this guy and I said, listen, here's the situation, because he didn't have any equity at all. There was zero equity. And I said, I can go ahead and I can buy this house from you, but I have to buy it for the current mortgage balance, whatever the balance is owed now. At the time, $161,000. And I said, I can buy it for that number and I can make payments and cash you out sometime in the future. And you won't have to drive an hour from Tiverton, Rhode Island to come maintain this house that's in Connecticut, right? I'll maintain those payments for whatever amount of time it is that you can move on with your life and not have to deal with this. So I ended up taking this house on a contract, and within 15 days of having it on the market, remember, house that we had to sell it as a handyman, a special, which just means that I'm going to sell it at a lower price because the person who buys it's going to have to put sweat equity in and fix it. So you give them room that when they buy the home at this price and they do the work, they're going to get the equity, right? Whatever work they get in, they're going to, when they cash me out, they're going to walk into a bunch of equity. The whole point, making it a win-win for everyone. Unfortunately, about three years into it, they stopped paying because COVID happened and they lost their job. It was, I think the buyer of the home worked in hotels. And as we know, hotels tanked. They completely, and she,
Right. So let's backtrack a little bit. So you sold it to him as a handyman. So he was somebody who was going to come in and do all the work because I think some of the rooms were down to the studs, right?
Yeah.
The kitchen was functional, right? I think there might have been a room where they can live. He could live in it, but there was other rooms that were down to the studs. So this guy was going to come in and put in that equity, like you said, the sweat equity, meaning he was going to do all the work, fix it all up. And then I think it was a rental, so he was going to get financing at some point, cash you out. And then, so talk about the end, I think something happened. You said during COVID, he just stopped paying, right?
So what's interesting too, and I remember this was my first real estate deal I'd ever done. I think it was 10 months in. I had got one contract in the first 6 months. And I remember in the first 6 months, I got the property under contract. I sent my first buyer to go look at this house. And then they called and be like, oh, I was greeted by tenants who said they have a year lease. So this guy didn't even freaking tell me that he rented. And that was my first experience, was losing a contract that way. And then about 4 months later, I got this house on a contract. And like I said, 15 days, we sold it to the family. So unfortunately, like I said, what ended up happening is they lost their job. They couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. So I had to end up going through the eviction process. I stuck it out with them for a little while because in the beginning, I wasn't treating it like a business. I was so attached to these people that were in the home because they were really good buyers. They were a really good family, but then if they don't pay, who's going to pay? I had to pay. So we figured it out for a little while, and then eventually I had to get them out. And this is the side, right? Not every real estate deal ends the way you want it to. I've had a bunch end great. I've had a couple not. So this happened to be one of them where on the day that we were able to get them out of the home for the eviction, and I went in the home, the house was, I wouldn't say it wasn't worse than when I gave it to them because they did do a bunch of work to it, but it definitely was it was a little beat up. And they had a bunch of animals in the house, so the house had a bad flea problem. I've never been around fleas, right? So I'm going in the house, whatever, I'm getting in my car, I'm like super itchy. I'm like, what the hell, man? It's harassing too hard. And either way, so this deal, what ended up happening was as I'm looking at this house and I find out there's a flea problem there, I'm like, who the hell is going to buy this house? Oh shit. All right. And I hire my realtor. I let him know what's going on. He goes in with a Tyvek suit on just because he didn't want to get fleas, of course. And he's like, all right, we got to do some stuff here. All we did was do a flea removal or whatever it was. We sold that house in a month to someone again who found vision in the opportunity that they can create this home into something beautiful again, because it was in a really nice area. And that deal, even though it didn't work out, I still made, I think it was $70,000 on it, and it was $20,000 cash out when I sold it with a realtor. And that was after realtor expenses. So that's a very interesting part about creative real estate. With time, it gives you the opportunity to turn a not so optimal situation still into a profitable one, which was it was good.
Yeah. So again, there's different exit strategies with creative financing. That's what I like about it too, right? You could have rented it, right? You could have fixed it up. You could have gotten the fleas out of there and just ended up renting it. Again, our exit strategy to begin with is our rent to own strategy, where you're finding people that are just outside of financing. They just need some time, whether they have some credit issues or they're self-employed. They don't necessarily look good on paper with a lender. So that's our first strategy, especially with sub 2. And if there's no equity or you're catching people up on their payment, you technically own that home forever, right? Because the title transfers to your company, like you said, and then you're just taking over the existing mortgage. you can do whatever you want. You can Airbnb it, you can rent it, you can do a rent to own. But in your situation, you're like, hey, you know what? I want to use this money to maybe buy another home. So you cashed out. Traditionally, you hired a realtor. Again, we typically don't use banks. We don't use realtors. But in this situation, you hired a realtor. And even with the commissions and fees, you ended up making some money at the end of the day. So that's awesome, Steve. So yes, that was our cool down, people. If you didn't know, he did segue into our cool down. So great stuff. Yeah. And I recently sold my sub two with a realtor and made, I think it was around 70K. Yeah. So this is the family that was the military family. And I ended up just selling traditionally again, because I want to use that money to get more deals down the line.
I think that's
Go ahead.
an important piece, right? Like what do we usually not do? We don't use banks, and we usually don't use realtors. But as your business starts progressing, right, and you start realizing the value of your time, you start utilizing different ways to be able, if you're the one that's handling a million phone calls, you try to sell it for sale by owner, you're not allowed to do more real estate deals, or you have properties on a contract, that hinders your ability to find buyers for your rent to own home. So I think it's also very important to realize that the value of your time and know where it needs to be spent the most. And fortunately, as you're building your business, you're given opportunities to be able to put someone in a position to do something that you don't want to do, right? Because that doesn't serve you. And at the time with both of us, it didn't serve us to be yielding a million people's phone calls or Zillow messages. Like, that stuff can suck your time away. You just got to know where to put your time. And that comes with growth, right? Because there's such a scarcity behind money a lot of the times. And when you start to live a life of abundance and you start realizing how important it is to pour into the things that you're passionate about and stop doing things that you don't want to do or are never going to really have that like need to fulfill that, that's when you start getting traction. That's when you really enjoy what you're doing. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, it's not going to last. Whether you're a gym teacher, a woodworker, or a real estate agent, or a real estate investor, if you don't enjoy it, it's eventually going to fall apart. So you just got to find where your genius mode is, as Dr. Amanda says, and live there. Always live there.
Cool stuff, man. I appreciate it, Steve. Good conversation today. Again, if you want to get a hold of us, we'll put it in the show notes, and hope everything's awesome on the East
Enjoy your
Coast.
weekend with your daughter, man.
Oh yeah, she's kicking butt, man. Playing the number 4 team in the nation today. So we'll see how that goes. Oh man, she's got a wicked changeup. If it works, and when it's not working, she's a cloud rat.
Today's going to be a good day. This weekend's going to be a good weekend. I can feel it.
All right, buddy. Have a good one.